What happens when royalty meets reality TV and the crown comes crashing down? In just 37 seconds, one comment turned a simple interview into the most explosive exit in talk show history. Andy Cohen had seen it all, from housewives throwing wine to celebrities storming off mid-taping. His late-night show was no stranger to drama. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on this particular evening. The studio lights were bright. The audience was packed, and Meghan Markle sat across from Andy in the iconic guest chair. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her posture perfect, her smile practiced. Andy, in his usual seat, was ready to dive into what he thought would be a fun, lighthearted conversation. "Welcome to the show," Andy said, his signature warmth radiating through the studio. "We're so excited to have you here tonight." Meghan tilted her head slightly, yet her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Thank you for having me," she replied, though her tone suggested she was doing him the favor. The first few minutes went smoothly enough. Andy asked about her recent projects, her life, the usual talk show fare. But there was something in the air, a tension that the audience could feel, but couldn't quite name. Meghan's answers were clipped, measured, as though she was carefully rationing her words. Then Andy did what Andy does best. He asked a real question. "So, I have to know," he said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "What's it really like adjusting to life outside of the institution? Is it everything you hoped it would be?" Meghan's expression shifted. The practiced smile faltered for just a moment before returning, harder this time. "Well, Andy," she began, emphasizing his name in a way that felt almost condescending, "I'm not sure you could understand what it's like to live under that kind of scrutiny." Andy raised an eyebrow but kept his composure. "I mean, I've had my fair share of public attention," he said with a laugh, trying to keep things light. "Nothing like yours, of course, but I think I can imagine." "Can you?" Meghan shot back, her voice taking on an edge. "Have you had the entire world dissecting your every move, your every word, your every outfit?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful banter they were used to on this show. Andy, ever the professional, smiled and tried to redirect. "Fair point," he said. "I think what people really want to know is how you're finding your voice now. You've been very outspoken about a lot of issues." "Finding my voice?" Meghan repeated, her eyes narrowing. "Andy, I've always had a voice. The difference is now people actually have to listen." There it was. That entitled tone that made the studio audience exchange glances. Andy maintained his smile, but those watching closely could see the shift in his demeanor. He was done playing nice. "Well, that's interesting," Andy said, his voice still friendly, but firmer now. "Because I think a lot of people would argue that you've had quite a platform for a while now. Multiple platforms, actually." Meghan sat up straighter. "Are you suggesting I haven't earned the right to speak?" "Not at all," Andy replied smoothly. "I'm just saying that talking about finding your voice when you've had access to some of the biggest media outlets in the world seems a bit, I don't know, disconnected." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. This was the kind of moment that would be replayed over and over, and everyone in that studio knew it. Meghan's face flushed slightly. "Disconnected," she repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "That's rich coming from someone who makes a living off other people's drama." Andy laughed, but it wasn't his usual jovial chuckle. This laugh had an edge. "Well, you're not wrong," he admitted, "but at least I'm honest about what I do. I don't pretend I'm some kind of humanitarian while I'm doing it." The audience gasped. Andy had gone there, and there was no turning back now. Meghan's composure was slipping. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair, her knuckles white. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice rising. "I have done more charitable work than you could ever dream of." "I'm sure you have," Andy said, his tone now openly skeptical. "But see, Here's the thing. When you do charity work and then immediately run to give an interview about how amazing you are for doing charity work, it kind of defeats the purpose, don't you think? The studio was electric. Crew members were frozen in place, cameras capturing every second of this unraveling. Meghan stood up abruptly, in the movement so sudden that it startled everyone. "How dare you?" she hissed. "You have no idea what I've been through. No idea what I've sacrificed." Andy remained seated, calm, in control. "You're right, I don't," he said. "But I do know that everyone's been through something. Everyone's made sacrifices. The difference is most people don't demand a medal for it." Meghan's face was now fully flushed, her carefully constructed image crumbling with each passing second. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "This is the kind of disrespect I've had to endure." "Disrespect?" Andy questioned, genuine confusion crossing his face. "I asked you legitimate questions. That's literally my job." "Your job," Meghan spat, "is to sit there and lob softball questions so I can promote whatever I'm here to promote. Your job is not to attack me." Andy shook his head slowly. "See, that's where you're wrong. My job is to have real conversations. If you wanted softballs, you should have gone on a different show. Everyone who sits in that chair knows what they're signing up for." Meghan pointed a finger at him, her hand trembling. "You're just like all the rest of them. You pretend to be progressive, pretend to be an ally, but the moment someone challenges your little kingdom, you show your true colors." "My little kingdom?" Andy repeated, standing up now to match her energy. "Lady, you're the one who married into an actual kingdom. I just host a talk show." The audience couldn't help it. A few nervous laughs escaped. Meghan's eyes darted to the crowd, and that seemed to push her over the edge. "This is absurd," she declared. "I came here as a courtesy, and this is how I'm treated?" Andy crossed his arms. "A courtesy? You came here because your publicist booked you to promote your new podcast. Let's not rewrite history while we're still making it." Meghan grabbed her purse from beside the chair. "I don't have to sit here and take this." "You're absolutely right," Andy agreed. "The door's right there." For a moment, Meghan seemed stunned that he wasn't backing down, wasn't apologizing, wasn't begging her to stay. She looked around the studio as if expecting someone to intervene, to tell Andy he was out of line. But the crew just stared, and Andy just waited. "You know what?" Meghan said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This show is beneath me anyway. You're beneath me. I should have never agreed to come to this circus." Andy smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "And yet, here you are." Meghan turned toward the exit, then spun back around. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she warned. "I have connections. I have influence. I could make one phone call and end your career." The studio went dead silent. This had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. Andy's expression hardened. "Is that a threat?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "It's a promise," Meghan replied. Andy walked closer to her, not intimidating, but present. "Let me tell you something," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I've been doing this for years. I've interviewed presidents, queens, criminals, saints, and everything in between. I've been threatened by people a lot scarier than you. So go ahead, make your phone call. But see what happens." Meghan's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. She had expected him to cower, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness. Instead, he had called her bluff, and she had nothing left. "You're going to regret this," she finally managed, her voice lacking the conviction from moments before. "Maybe," Andy said with a shrug, "but probably not." Meghan looked around the studio one last time, searching for an ally, for someone to validate her outrage. The audience sat in stunned silence. The crew focused intently on their equipment. No one was coming to her rescue. "This isn't over," she declared, though it sounded more like a child's last word than a genuine threat. "Actually," Andy said, gesturing toward the door. "I'm pretty sure it is." Meghan's face contorted with rage and humiliation. She spun on her heel and marched toward the exit, her designer heels clicking loudly against the studio floor. Every step echoed through the silent space. She reached the door and grabbed the handle, then paused. For a second, it seemed like she might turn around, might try to salvage some dignity from this disaster. But she didn't. She yanked the door open and walked out without looking back, the door slamming behind her with a resounding thud that seemed to shake the entire studio. Andy stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door. Then he turned back to his audience, who were still processing what they had just witnessed. Slowly, someone started clapping. Then another person joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire studio was on their feet, applauding. Andy held up his hands, trying to quiet them down, but they wouldn't stop. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and ran a hand through his hair. When the applause finally died down, he looked directly into the camera. "Well," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face, "I think we need to go to commercial." The audience laughed, in the tension finally breaking. But Andy wasn't laughing. He was thinking about how it had all gone so wrong so quickly. He had started the interview with genuine intentions, wanting to have a real conversation. But Meghan had come in with armor on, ready for a fight, expecting everyone to treat her like she was still royalty. During the commercial break, the studio buzzed with energy. Producers were on their phones. Audience members were texting their friends. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something significant, something that would be talked about for years to come. Andy sat at his desk, drinking water, trying to process what had just happened. His executive producer approached him cautiously. "That was intense," she said, stating the obvious. Andy nodded. "Yeah, it was." "Do you think she'll actually try to come after the show?" the producer asked, genuine concern in her voice. Andy considered this. "Maybe," he admitted. "But we didn't do anything wrong. We asked questions. She's the one who threatened us, who stormed off, who made a scene. All of that is on camera." The producer nodded, relieved. "Still, we should probably prepare for some backlash." "There's always backlash," Andy said with a tired smile. "That's the nature of this business." When they came back from commercial, Andy addressed what had happened head on. He didn't shy away from it, didn't pretend it hadn't occurred. He spoke to his audience with honesty and transparency. "So, as you all saw, we had a bit of a situation," he began. "I want to be clear about something. This show has always been about honest conversations. Sometimes those conversations get uncomfortable. Sometimes people don't like the questions they're asked. But I'm not going to apologize for doing my job." The audience applauded again, showing their support. "I respect everyone who comes on this show," Andy continued. "But respect goes both ways. When someone sits in that chair, they're agreeing to have a real conversation, not a puff piece. That's what we do here. That's what we've always done." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I hope our guest finds peace with whatever she's dealing with, but I also hope she understands that the world doesn't owe her anything just because of her title or her past. We're all just people trying to figure it out." The sincerity in his voice was palpable. This wasn't just a host defending his show. This was a human being standing up for himself and for the integrity of his work. Back in the green room, where guests usually waited before and after their appearances, Meghan's team scrambled. They knew this was bad. They knew the optics were terrible. Their client had just threatened a beloved talk show host on live television and then stormed off like a petulant child. No amount of spin could make this look good. Meanwhile, on social media, where clips of the confrontation were already going viral, people were dissecting every word, every facial expression, every gesture. The consensus was overwhelmingly in Andy's favor. People praised him for standing his ground, for not being intimidated, for treating her like he would treat any other guest. There were, of course, some defenders of Meghan. They argued she had been ambushed, that Andy had been too harsh, that he should have been more deferential given everything she had been through. But even many of her usual supporters had to admit that her behavior had been out of line. Threatening someone's career on live television was never a good look, no matter the circumstances. In the studio, Andy finished the rest of his show with his typical grace and humor. He had other guests scheduled, and he gave them his full attention, proving that one dramatic moment wouldn't derail an entire evening. His professionalism shone through, making Meghan's outburst look even worse in comparison. As the show wrapped and the audience filed out, they were still buzzing with excitement. They had come expecting a typical late-night talk show and had instead witnessed what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about television moments of the year. Andy's crew gathered around him afterward, offering support and reassurance. They had worked with him long enough to know that despite his confident exterior, moments like this took a toll. But Andy seemed okay, perhaps even relieved in a strange way. "You know what the crazy thing is," he said to his team. "I actually wanted to like her. I wanted to have a good conversation. But she came in looking for a fight. And when I didn't just roll over, she couldn't handle it." His team nodded, understanding completely. They had all seen guests come through, with attitudes, with demands, with inflated senses of self-importance. But Meghan had taken it to another level entirely. The incident raised bigger questions about celebrity culture, about entitlement, about the difference between having a platform and having something worthwhile to say. Meghan had built her post-royal life on the narrative of being silenced, of being a victim, of finally being able to speak her truth. But when faced with actual questions, actual pushback, actual conversation, she had crumbled. Andy represented something different. He represented the idea that fame doesn't make you immune to scrutiny, that having a title doesn't mean you're above being challenged, that everyone, regardless of their background or status, should be able to engage in honest dialogue without resorting to threats and tantrums. The contrast between the two of them in that moment was stark. Andy, seated, calm, asking questions. Meghan, standing, agitated, making demands. Andy, willing to engage. Meghan, retreating when things didn't go her way. Andy, confident in his position. Meghan, relying on threats when her arguments fell flat. It was a masterclass in how to handle conflict with grace versus how to let ego destroy your credibility. Andy had nothing to prove, so he didn't try to prove anything. Meghan, on the other hand, seemed desperate to assert her importance, her relevance, her power. And in that desperation, she lost all three. The show's ratings for that episode would go on to be some of the highest in its history, so people who had never watched before tuned in to see the clips. The episode was replayed, analyzed, discussed, and debated across every platform imaginable. Andy's handling of the situation was praised by fellow hosts, by journalists, by anyone who understood the importance of asking tough questions. For Meghan, the incident became another entry in a growing list of public relations disasters. Her team tried to control the narrative, tried to spin it as Andy being aggressive or inappropriate. But the footage spoke for itself. She had been the aggressor. She had made the threats. She had stormed off. No amount of creative editing or strategic leaking could change those facts. In the days that followed, other talk show hosts reached out to Andy, expressing solidarity and sharing their own stories of difficult guests. It seemed everyone had a story about someone who came on their show expecting to be worshipped rather than interviewed. But few had handled it with the poise and directness that Andy had displayed. The incident also sparked conversations about the interview process itself. Should hosts treat certain guests differently based on their perceived status? Should there be questions that are off limits for some people, but not others? Andy's answer was clear. Everyone gets the same treatment. Everyone gets asked real questions. Everyone is held to the same standard. This wasn't about being mean or confrontational for the sake of ratings. This was about integrity. This was about respecting the audience enough to have genuine conversations rather than staged promotional appearances. This was about remembering that at the end of the day, whether you're royalty or reality TV, you're still just a person sitting across from another person having a conversation. Andy didn't set out that night to create a viral moment or to take down a guest. He set out to do what he always did: have a real conversation. The fact that Meghan couldn't handle that said far more about her than it did about him. The audience in that studio, the viewers at home, and everyone who watched the clips afterward saw something important. They saw what happens when entitlement meets authenticity. They saw what happens when someone who demands respect fails to show it. They saw what happens when the facade cracks and the real person underneath is revealed. And what they saw wasn't pretty. They saw someone who talked constantly about being silenced, but couldn't handle a simple question. They saw someone who claimed to want honest dialogue, but threatened someone's career when the dialogue didn't go her way. They saw someone who presented herself as strong and independent, but fell apart the moment she faced the slightest pushback. Andy, meanwhile, showed everyone exactly who he was: a professional who takes his job seriously, and a person who won't be bullied or intimidated, a host who believes in the power of honest conversation even when it's uncomfortable, someone who understands that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. The contrast was undeniable, and the public verdict was swift and decisive. Andy had won not by being cruel or unfair, but simply by being himself and expecting his guest to engage honestly. Meghan had lost not because Andy had attacked her, but because she had attacked him and then fled when he stood his ground. In the end, that 37 seconds of confrontation revealed everything anyone needed to know about both of them. It showed character, or the lack thereof. It showed strength, or the illusion of it. It showed what happens when someone who's used to everyone bowing down finally meets someone who won't. And that studio door slamming shut wasn't just the end of an interview. It was the sound of credibility walking out the door, of entitlement meeting its match, of a carefully constructed image shattering into pieces. But let's rewind for a moment and look at how this all escalated so quickly. Because the truth is, the warning signs were there from the very beginning. From the moment Meghan walked onto that set, there was an energy about her that felt different from other guests. She didn't wave to the audience like most people do. She didn't smile warmly at the crew. She walked straight to her chair with the kind of focus usually reserved for heading into battle. Andy noticed it immediately. He had interviewed thousands of people over the years, and he could always tell within the first 30 seconds what kind of interview it was going to be. Some guests were nervous and needed to be put at ease. Some were excited and needed to be reined in a bit. Some were guarded and needed gentle coaxing to open up. And some, like Meghan that night, came in with something to prove. When the cameras started rolling, Andy tried his best to break through that wall. He complimented her dress, asked about her flight, made small talk about the weather, all the usual warm-up banter that helps guests relax. But Meghan responded to each attempt with one-word answers and tight smiles. She wasn't interested in small talk. She wasn't interested in being charmed. She was there for a purpose, though what that purpose was remained unclear. "So tell us what you've been working on lately," Andy said, trying to steer into safer territory. Meghan shifted in her chair. "Well, I've been very busy with my advocacy work," she said, the emphasis on advocacy making it clear she considered this far more important than anything else. "That's wonderful," Andy replied genuinely. "What causes are you focusing on right now?" Meghan launched into a rehearsed speech about various initiatives, name-dropping organizations and throwing around statistics.